And welcome to the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, where we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options. Not having a clear plan is the enemy, and using a proven tax deferral strategy such as the Deferred Sales Trust or the 1031 exchange is the best way for you to defer capital gains tax on highly appreciated assets such as cryptocurrency, primary homes, investment real estate, and businesses. I'm your host, Brett Swarts. In each episode, I'm joined by some of the best real estate, financial, wealth, and sometimes 1031 experts in the world, where they share their ideas, deal stories, and inspiration. So together we can make complex tax deferral strategies simple and passive income plans achievable. Hey, I'm excited about our next guest. He is out of the great city of San Diego, and he's a senior vice president at Investors 1031 Exchange with a focus on sales and marketing for the company. He is experienced. He's a very experienced commercial real estate executive who has served on the investment committees over several real estate capital firms throughout his career. And he has been involved in over $1 billion of real estate development and acquisitions and has helped acquire 64 projects that have gone full cycle across many asset classes. He has raised over $600 million in equity for various real estate projects, and it was very instrumental in successfully issuing $180 million of debt on the Tel Aviv stock. Brandon, our guest, has an undergraduate degree in real estate as well as finance from Baylor University. Please welcome to the show with me, Brandon Burns. Hey, Brandon, how you doing, sir?
Brett, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for taking the time and giving me the opportunity to join you here.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, get to know you for the first time, would you give us a little bit more about your story and your current focus?
Absolutely. So today I'm a qualified intermediary. So my firm facilitates 1031 exchanges, helping clients fully defer all of their taxes on the time of sale. Prior to that, I worked for a number of real estate investment groups, a developer, family office developer, sat on the investment committee and was honored to be a part of some great transactions. But nothing makes me happier today than helping my clients fully avoid paying taxes. It's just the worst when you have to give up money to Uncle Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. And best being in California and on the front lines of, let's say, high appreciation and also high taxes, we definitely share that value. And before we dive into, the potential tax reform that's on the table and the potential changes in commercial real estate in the 1031 exchange, I want to take one step back, Brandon, and help our listeners and myself get to know you a little bit better. I believe we've all been given certain gifts in this life. Some people call them superpowers or strengths. And I believe they're God-given gifts, and they're given to us to be a blessing and help to others. So I want you to go back maybe to your high school days, university days at Baylor, and maybe help us understand maybe one or two gifts that you believe you've been given, and how does that help how you help and bless people today?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was interesting to me when I was a young college student. My father owns an accounting firm, and I thought that I potentially could follow in his footsteps. And after taking some detailed accounting courses, I realized that if I spent my entire life looking at the past, then I didn't know that would make me happy. So I was fortunate enough to take a real estate finance class and then dual major in finance and real estate. And, it's really awesome to me to be able to look and say, okay, I can essentially do insider trading with real estate, right? If you invest in the stock market and you know more than someone else, and you trade on that information, that's illegal. That's the definition of insider trading. In real estate, if you know more than other people and you make moves based on that information, you make money. And that's something that I really think is powerful about real estate. I think that's powerful about investing, being able to remove, some of the risk and have more information than other people just makes me more comfortable as I invest my dollars,
Excellent. Yeah, I like that. So the idea of forward looking and being able to take the information and see those things that other people may not see or be willing to do the work to uncover, right, with real estate, right. and then helping others act on that information. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. That's very fair.
Love it. Beautiful. So now let's dive right into the big challenges that are in the room for commercial real estate in the 1031 exchange, and that's tax reform. So Biden has come out and it said a few different things, right, about the 1031 exchange, potentially limiting it, and also the stepped-up basis, potentially limiting or eliminating that. So let's just start with the big macro. what are you seeing in the 1031 world? What concerns you? And then let's dive into maybe what's the outcome of these things.
For sure. Great question. I think there's a number of headwinds that are facing real estate investors today, both at the local and federal level. Everyone has a different local level, so I don't want to dive into that too much. But at a high level, California or other places that are facing housing issues are trying to figure out how to regulate some of the Airbnb, putting some restrictive controls around that. Other states are trying to put rent control in place. And so that's one headwind. But at the federal level, Biden has come out, the Biden administration, they need to figure out how to fund some of the things that they want to fund. Many people don't know, but the amount of money in circulation went up by approximately 40% in 2020. The St. Louis Federal Reserve actually tracks that. They discontinued their tracking because it went up so dramatically recently. I'm not sure exactly what the rationale was behind that, but where they stopped tracking it, there was 40% more money out there. So that was issued by the government for the most part, right? Secondly, the Biden administration wants to do some really potentially cool and interesting things, where eliminating student loans for some folks, going in and making healthcare more affordable than it already is, making it more available than it already is. But the real question is, at some point, you have to figure out how to pay for that, right? So the Biden administration is facing this large looming question of how do we pay for all these programs, and how do we figure out how to slow down the deficit that has recently been created. So they've come out and had some language around different parts of the taxation. I've paid primarily attention to things that affect real estate investors. So the kind of key things that affect real estate investors today, first of all, Biden recently came out and said he wants to increase the long-term capital gains rate to be higher than the highest short-term marginal tax rate. He said he wants to increase it. They're going to propose, which they haven't yet. He said he's going to propose a highest tax bracket, long-term federal capital gains of 43.6%. So that'll raise taxes on long-term real estate investors or any long-term investors by approximately 23%. So that can be aggressive. Secondly, Biden has said he wants to potentially limit or remove 1031 exchanges for people. He originally came out about this time last year and said he's going to remove it completely. He then came out last September and said he's going to remove it for anyone who makes over $400,000 a year adjusted gross income on their tax return. And then most recently, last month, he came out and said he wants it to be ineligible for anyone who makes over $500,000. So again, these aren't things that have happened. These are things that are potentially going to be proposed. And there may be some loopholes. How do you define a profit of $500,000, right? Do you cut your property up into multiple properties? Do you potentially be able to play with debt? And I'm not sure how that's going to be defined, but I do think it's potentially going to be a little bit more challenging in the future to do a 1031 exchange. So, one of the things that I talk about with people that come and ask me for advice as they're planning is, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. However, if you're looking to potentially do a 1031 exchange in the next 1 to 5 years, it probably makes sense to evaluate accelerating that timeline, because the worst case situation that no one wants to be in is to turn around and need to sell the real estate asset that you've deferred taxes on for 15, 20, 30 years, suddenly be in a situation where a 1031 may not be eligible for you, and you're looking at a really aggressive taxable event. If you're in a tax bracket of 43% long-term federal capital gains, then you're also in a state that charges state income tax. California is about 10, Colorado is about 4. Many other states have some type of state taxes. You also have a depreciation recapture tax where you have to pay back 25% of whatever you've depreciated. So if you've owned a property for 10, 15, 20 years and you depreciated it considerably or fully, that can add an extra 10, 20, 25% tax burden. So, if you were to look at a situation where, you've got 25 years of built up tax deferrals and you fully depreciated your asset, you might be in a 60 or 65% tax bracket. And that's heartbreaking. That's, a terrible place to be. So, for folks that are looking to potentially do an exchange, I think with good data, you can make good decisions. And with bad data, you make random decisions. It makes sense to evaluate moving up that timeline.
Yeah, just staggering stats there. And you said it so well, right? Especially increasing the long-term capital gains tax rate up by about 23%. So he's looking at taking federal at 20 to 39.6, and then you add the Obamacare on top of that. And like state of California, for example, is 13.3. Right. So the minimum I always say is 37% for investment property inside of California. Then you add depreciation recapture, but the 37 plus the 20 makes it 57. And then depreciation recapture could be from 35 to 10. You're looking up 70%. I mean, this is insane, right? It's really what it comes down to. Someone works for 10, 20, 30 years. And the other point, which is really interesting, I think you kind of touched on a little bit, is like who's making $500,000? So I think there's a study that was recently done by the Tax Foundation, and they found that this, part of what Biden was proposing was, hey, look, it's about 500,000 Americans this will affect. Well, what he's not affecting is each year that changes who's making that 500. In other words, somebody might have a property that's worth $1 million. Let's just say they've been making 100 to 120 for 20 years, but now when they go to sell that, guess what? All of a sudden they're making 500 in that given year, or depending on how they dissect this. So that affects millions and millions and millions of people. And when you look at it on that scale, you go, no, it doesn't make any sense. These aren't ultra rich people. These are folks that put blood, sweat, and tears for 10, 20, 30 years, invested, saved, managed their property for the community, and now they're going to get wiped out. So obviously you can tell what side Brandon and I are on. And once you're closer to these folks who have built wealth using real estate and doing the 1031 exchange, it's just devastating to think about that. Why do you think the Biden administration is targeting the 1031 in particular? Is there any insight to that, Brandon, that you figured out?
So, a lot of times I have people ask me, hey, due to the pandemic, are there any things that have come out that can help us, right? And in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a little bit of help. One of the rules for a 1031 exchange is a time component where you have 45 days to identify a number of properties that you may or may not purchase and 180 days to close on one or more of those properties in a tax deferred situation. So at this point last year, they gave a little bit more time on that 45 days. They gave it was either to July 15th or 45 days, whichever was longer. But that help is burned off, right? So I believe that the government sees people who have significant wealth through real estate as really wealthy people. And I think that's a wrong way to look at it. I recently had a client who was a teacher, and when she was 28 years old, someone mentioned to her and said, hey, you should spend your summer working, save up enough money to buy a duplex, because real estate is really how normal people can build wealth. And so she took 2 summers, age 28, 29, worked, some kind of long hours, terrible job, instead of vacationing with her other teacher friends over the summer. And she saved up enough for a small down payment on a duplex. She's now on her 4th exchange, and she's generating about $6,000 a month of mostly tax-free income, because there's some great tax strategies around real estate income. And she's consistently exchanged, and she hasn't, had some large taxable event that bit in to that equity. She's using it as a cash flow vehicle, and it's changed her life, right? As a teacher, she does have a pension, but it's not substantial. And this extra $6,000 a month has allowed her to live a much higher quality of life. And, unfortunately, she's the kind of person that is going to be impacted. She's going to be stuck in this property should this legislation go through. She's now going to be stuck in this property forever. Luckily for her, I think she just did an exchange. She's probably fine for the next 10 to 15 years. But there are folks that are not, right? I was right before this meeting, I was actually on the phone with somebody, and we were kind of talking about game planning and tax planning, because he owns a Airbnb rental in San Diego, and San Diego has come in and they're limiting the amount of Airbnbs. They're trying to figure out how to deal with this, with a potential housing crisis, and how do we instead of taking these homes that are mini hotels, how do we put them back in the long-term rental market? And he feels like that his income is going to drop by 30 or 40%. So he needs to sell his property kind of while he still can at value. And we were kind of talking through this. He told me, Brandon, there's so much of my net worth, so much of my retirement tied up in this property that, should I do a misstep here, or should there be, 50, 60, 70%, gouge from the government into what I've planned for, that's just devastating. And I don't know that I could recover at this point in life. So, those are the kind of conversations that, truly break my heart as I talk to clients.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And by the way, having a backup plan for a failed 1031 exchange or alternative sometimes can be really a lifesaver for these situations.
Absolutely.
We just helped a client who he owned 30 years of commercial real estate, value add multifamily, started out as a broker, built up his portfolio. And this is right before COVID, right? And so he's looking around for deals. He sold a $7.6 million deal in Georgia. He's searching around. And he's looking at these 4.5, 5 cap deals that have been squeezed out of the cash flow, right, or squeezed out of the upside, still have minimal cash flow. And he's going, I don't know if I want to pay for this. Then COVID hit, and then he's like, I definitely don't want to jump into something. Got very cautious, and he was past his 45-day identification, and so he was able to use our strategy called the Deferred Sales Trust to give him a chance to save the failed 1031. And defer the tax, and then diversify, pay off his debt, and just be sit on the sidelines. And so I'm curious, I don't know if you've heard of the Deferred Sales Trust, Brandon, or your thoughts on alternatives, but what would being able to save a failed 1031 exchange mean for clients, or just have a backup plan in case it fails?
I think it's important to have a backup plan. The worst thing that you can possibly do is have to write a $500,000, $1 million, a $2 million check to Uncle Sam just because you didn't explore the options that are in front of you. One of my kind of catchphrase things that I like to use is, with good data, we can make good decisions. With bad data, we make random decisions. And so, I think that's really helpful. And, obviously anyone that's listening to this or watching this, I would just really encourage you to make sure that you have all the data so that you can make the best decision for you, and hopefully be in a situation where you can avoid having to write such a large, check to Uncle Sam. That's the goal of all of this, is to avoid that.
Exactly. Yep. And you can go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com to learn more about the Deferred Sales Trust. So starting out at Marcus and Millichap, Brandon, we learned about the 1031 exchange on about day 3, right? And then I started helping people do it, right? And it's 2006, and everyone's high-fiving, right? 05, buying. Now people love to be sellers, but they hated to be the buyers because they felt like they're overpaying, right? Low inventory, low interest rate, high values, competing. And then the music stopped. And they're looking around going, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do? And so I went, my story is I went from making some money at Marcus into like nothing overnight. And all of a sudden my clients were fighting with the banks and had too much debt and not enough diversification, not enough liquidity. Long story short, I learned about the Deferred Sales Trust, business starts to grow, help the clients now do something different. But the 1031 exchange, which is interesting, it only applies to investment property, right? It's not just Biden who's put this thing under fire. This thing's been under fire for years. And Trump and their administration, they furtherly limited it down to essentially investment property, right? And so
Correct.
There's people who are selling high-end primary homes that the 1031 does not qualify for. Businesses, right? I'm helping people with cryptocurrency right now. Public stock, private stock. And you can essentially now defer capital gains tax using the Deferred Sales Trust, and then via an LLC partnership go and buy real estate. So it's kind of like 1031ing, crypto or business into more real estate. So I'm curious on, the 1031. I feel like they should just open it up to more things, right? Like they should not just limit it down to investment real estate. That increases commerce, builds the macroeconomics. So just talk about the macro, the good things about the 1031, and how if we could open it up to more things, that would actually spur more economic growth, more tax revenue, and actually be more beneficial for what we believe the Biden administration is trying to achieve.
I agree. The 1031 exchange, it can be powerful to help you avoid taxes, but it's certainly limited, right? So you have a time component, the 45 days to identify properties you may or may not buy, 180 days to purchase something you identified. Secondly, you have to purchase the same amount or more of your net sales price. So if you sell a property for $1 million and you have $50,000 of transaction costs, you have to purchase a property for $950,000 or more, which isn't always ideal for people, but that is one of the rules for the 1031 exchange. You also have to have continuity of title, which usually isn't an issue, but can be an issue. I just had a client cancel an exchange because they were under contract to purchase a new property. They'd sold it in a family trust. And the last second, the bank decided they weren't going to loan to the trust. They would only loan to him personally. And the 1031 exchange wasn't a vehicle where that could happen. So he had to choose between either losing his property, finding another lender, or paying taxes, and he chose to pay taxes. So there's definitely some limitations to a 1031 exchange, and if something doesn't fit in that box, then it's important to understand what other options are available, and a deferred sales trust can be a great option if something isn't a fit for an exchange.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. New depreciation schedules, right? So one of the main reasons to own real estate is the depreciation to offset the income, right? And or you can get some cost seg on another deal, and and maybe even eliminate some capital gains tax in a given year. But if you own real estate, let's say for 27 and a half years, or you've done 1031 exchanges when the depreciation schedule travels, right, you can run out of that depreciation. So what would a brand new depreciation schedule mean for 1031 clients if for some reason they decided to allow that?
Yeah, like you said, depreciation is one of the really powerful things for owning real estate, right? If you can have income that some portion or all of it isn't taxable, and then potentially have other depreciation that you can write off that's against other income that you have. Something you mentioned was a cost segregation. That's where obviously about that, but for the listeners that don't, that's where a engineering firm comes in and can accelerate a large percentage of your property's depreciation into a 5 to 10 year schedule, and so that allows you to really push a lot of that depreciation forward. And that's one of the really powerful things that helps real estate investors avoid taxes, not only on the income from real estate, but also able to offset their other income. But the more in general that you can do with that, the better off you are. That's why I think Trump, didn't want to release his tax returns, right? Is because you could see some of he has advantages as a real estate investor where, you can, don't have to pay some of these taxes a lot of times, especially when you have a lot of property and you can do some advanced planning. So it can be very, very powerful to have to reset your depreciation schedule or to accelerate depreciation into the first 5 to 10 years that you own a property, for sure.
Awesome. Next thing has always been, we learned drop until you swap until you drop, right? And then get this stepped up basis and kids walk away tax free. Everyone's giving high fives, but the government's kind of sitting and saying like, wait, we're not getting our, if they put it in the quotations, fair share, right? There are people just deferring. And as real estate investors, like, this is the best thing, right? Now they're talking about eliminating or limiting the stepped up basis. So what does that do to our whole, what we've been planning, Brandon? Drop until we swap until we drop.
I mean, that definitely throws a wrench in the wheel, right? If the where a 1031 exchange can be powerful is where, and it's not in every situation, but the situation where a 1031 exchange is powerful is if someone wants to generate income, consistent, reliable income from their real estate asset, and then pass it on to the next generation without having this, big tax gouge. Well, the current administration wants to change that. And it's going to be fascinating to see what's going to happen. Like I said, and like you've referenced and mentioned, they're proposing these bills where they are going to aggressively tax things. They're going to remove tax loopholes, what they call them, the 1031 exchange. I don't consider it a loophole, but that's the language they use around it. And they're going to try to eliminate generational transfers, right? It's really interesting to see how the world has changed. In the last year, we saw a lot of these smaller businesses kind of really struggle, while some of the larger businesses, Costco and Walmart, were able to benefit from the increased traffic. And so it's really interesting to see the world may turn from, I think 5 and 10, 20 years ago, the United States was based around family and generational wealth transfers, small business. Those were kind of the things that drove the economy. And if those things are removed, I'm not sure what's going to continue to drive our economy. And unfortunately, right now, that's the push is to potentially hamper small businesses and generational wealth transfers.
100%. It's upside down, right? It's big government and big corporations coming together and squeezing the middle class and trying to say that they're the really wealthy ones, but we're going to take away these loopholes that passes generational wealth. That at some point you go, our leadership has failed us, but which is what I believe. Now I want to move into estate tax, which is the other one that's kind of the big for the ultra wealthy folks, right? That's kind of the elephant in the room that the 1031 never, as far as I know, ever addressed. It was always, drop into your swap, get the stepped up basis. But if I was worth 52 million, let's just say my wife and I, and all of it was inside of our taxable estate, we get the stepped up basis if we were to pass, right? And our kids would, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we would get hit with that 40% death tax. So the challenge is, how do you get outside your taxable estate and still maintain and not get hit with the death tax, right? So what do you think about that? What is typically the way maybe you found to help clients who have that question?
I'm not as involved in those conversations. Where I stay is, I believe that it's important to be really good at your niche and where you're at, right? So when it comes to conversations that are outside real estate or more estate planning, that's where I like to bring in someone who, is able to keep up with some of the changing legislation, because that does consistently change. And, that's not something where I spend a ton of time. So, I focus on the 50 or 60 1031 exchanges that we do a month and make sure that we do those well, and then bring in experts for the other. So all that to say, I'm not sure I can answer your question to the extent.
Fair enough. No, that's good. I was just saying there was something out there. I mean, we use the Deferred Sales Trust to move it outside the taxable estate. We have a DST plus, and I was wondering if there was any kind of creative 1031 to do it. That being said, you can learn more about Brandon Burns at i1031x.com. That's i1031x.com. Brandon, are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready. Bring it on.
All right. Knowing what you know now, if you go back to your 25-year-old self, what's the one gold nugget you would make sure to tell yourself to do?
If I could go back to my 25-year-old self, to reach back 13 years ago, I would tell myself to invest more. Looking back on my 20s, I think I bought into some of the Instagram lifestyle where it, spent a lot of money on trips and frivolous things. I think today the middle class is getting squeezed. Where our parents were able to build and have a really comfortable life, working in a job, maybe not having to invest as much. I think that's changed today. The pandemic, I think, moved forward some trends. And one of those trends is really reducing the middle class, right? So if you look at the wage earners, people who only had W-2 income, those people got a small stimulus check. They got a $1,300 stimulus check, and then potentially two, I think, $1,200 stimulus checks, right? If you looked at people who were able to invest, whether that was in the stock market, whether that was in crypto, whether that was in real estate, those people have essentially gotten a small piece of a several $1 trillion stimulus, right? So if you look, the investors got trillions of dollars, and the W-2 wage earners, had to split, a couple, maybe $100 million or some much smaller pool. And I think that trend is going to continue. If we look at, since the new administration came in office, a stat that I was looking at this morning was, I think gas is up 37%, coal is up over 50%, real estate is up 20 to 30%, depending on where you are. And there was a number of others that were less. I think bread was maybe 5% and some other things. But the key point is inflation is coming, right? So the Fed has said, hey, we're going to put a blind eye to this. We're going to, in my opinion, pretend that inflation isn't coming. I think that it is. And so, if we hit, if you look at the way that I like to look at it is, when I went to Baylor University in 2003, the tuition was $16,000 a year. Today, the tuition is $50,000 a year, which is a dramatic jump if you look at it that way. But what's happened is universities have raised their tuition approximately 6 to 8% per year, which is not so aggressive until you look back and you see the compounding buildup of that over time. If we enter a 6 to 8% inflation range, which I think is entirely reasonable and probably already happening, then that's this, the $16,000 that I saved in 2003 today. It's just the spending power is so much smaller, right? And so I think inflation is coming, and people should invest. You have to be on the ownership side of the table. When the pandemic happened, I looked back and said, okay, my business was down for about 30 days as people said, hey, we're going to stop, we're going to evaluate, we're going to decide what to do. So I said, okay, I've got some free time. I'm a student of history. I really like history. Let me look back on the previous recessions or depressions, and let me see if I can draw some parallels. And I don't think that what we're facing today is the same thing we faced in 2008 with the financial crisis. I don't think what we're facing today necessarily is the same as the dot-com bubble. I do think that what we're facing today is similar to what happened at the end of the Roaring '20s into the Depression. And so who were the winners during that time period? There were definitely people that were losers, right? 30% of the population was unemployed. You had hobos riding on trains, going from door to door, just trying to find enough to feed themselves and maybe send some money home to their family. But you also had the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers that created generational wealth. So, I look back and said, okay, what was the difference between the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and the people that were traveling on trains? And how do I take that information and apply it to today? And, as I looked at it, the people that were on the ownership side of the table, the Vanderbilts were in the steel business, right? The Rockefellers were in the railroad business. So people that were on the ownership side of the table that were creating goods and services that owned hard assets disproportionately outperformed. And the people that were wage earners lost their jobs, became homeless, and traveled on trains for the most part, right? And so as I look to my future, I'm in my mid upper 30s. As I look to my future, I need to consistently be more and more on the side of the ownership side of the table rather than just the wage earner. Because as we hit inflation, as I've looked at many of my peers that graduated with, from college over a decade ago, we've seen the cost of living go up substantially, and not all my peers have had consummate, increases in their wages. And so, they struggled, and year over year, they said, hey, I'm doing the right things. I don't understand why I don't get ahead. And those are the people that didn't invest. So I think the new environment that we're in, if you're able to own something, whether that's a hard asset or a business that produces a physical good, that you will do outstanding, disproportionately well. If you don't invest, you'll just do, in my opinion, disproportionately poor as we enter a more inflationary time period.
Brandon, so good. We could almost have a whole show on that, which we're going to go down to our last two questions. But that's amazing answers. So I want you to keep going there. What's the number one book you've recommended or gifted the most in the past year?
The book I've gifted the most is what's the book? It's called something about why. I don't know. I'm blanking on it.
Why?
It starts with why. Yeah. So someone told me something a while ago that I've never forgotten. They told me that there's no true hard questions. If you're facing a decision or a question that you find difficult, it's not because you're actually facing a difficult question. It's because you're asking the wrong question. So if you ask the right question, the answer is intuitively obvious. So when faced with a challenging situation, instead of struggling with the answer and saying, gosh, what do I do here? You should figure out how to ask better questions. So, that's been something that has kind of stuck with me and the people that I know as they face difficult decisions. I've given them that book. Starts with why. Say, ask better questions.
Love it. Last question for you, and we'll wrap up the show. After all your success and helping so many people, almost making the Baylor basketball team as a random walk-on when everything hit the fan, and now Baylor won the championship. That's a whole other story for another day. How do you stay centered in your values, Brandon, and how do you stay encouraged, charged forward to reach new goals?
Well, that's a big question. I think the number one thing is having a good community. I've been fortunate to be able to surround myself with good people. I moved from Dallas to San Diego 5 years ago, and now I split my time between Texas and California, which are two different places. But 5 years ago, one of the reasons that I came to California, the main reason was for a job opportunity. But the secondary reason was I turned around in my community. While they were great people, they often weren't as enterprising, right? They're more about checking boxes and maybe not pushing toward goals. And in the past 5 years, I've been fortunate enough to come across people that are pushing toward goals, that are pushing to make themselves a better person. And I think most of us have heard the adage that you're the average of the 5 people closest to you, and I do think that's true. But being in a good community of people that while not perfect, say, I'm going to focus on my goals, I'm going to focus on my morals, I'm going to focus on self-education. That's something that's been really powerful to me.
Love it. Brandon, I want to thank you for being on the show. Would you mind our listeners one last time where they can find you?
Absolutely. Our website is i1031x.com. You can always reach me at brandon@i1031x.com. I'm here. I'm glad to help anyone who has questions. My personal view on the world is, if I wasn't in this business, I would be a kindergarten teacher. So nothing makes me happier than being able to interact with people as they go through these large decisions about selling property, and being able to add value, be a connector, or share information. I'm very good at my small space. I'm not as good outside my space, like potential some of the estate planning stuff. But in my space, I have a lot of information, and I focus on being an expert in my space. So glad to help anyone who has real estate tax questions.
Yeah, amazing job. By the way, I think you'd be an amazing kindergarten teacher and a basketball coach. We should get a team going down in San Diego. Maybe they can make a bunch of money, move down there, and we can coach a team together. Thank you for being on the show, Brandon. And I want to encourage you to keep using your gift of seeing things before they happen, right? Or more insider trading and helping people make great decisions and map those things out. I don't think there's a better person who could be talking about tax reform right now with the 1031 and what's going on than you. So keep getting the message out. And let's hope it stays as favorable for the real estate investor and the middle class and those who are creating generational wealth as we can. We will pray for that. And thank you so much for being on the show. And I also want to thank our listeners for listening to another episode of the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast. As always, we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options. Not having a clear plan is the enemy, and using a proven tax deferral strategy, such as the Deferred Sales Trust, to save your failed 1031 exchange, to defer taxes on cryptocurrency, a business, primary home, and or using a 1031 exchange. Hopefully they're still around here in full force in another year or so, is the best way for you to grow your wealth and defer tax. Please rate, review, subscribe. Go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com, YouTube, iTunes. Go to experttaxsecrets.com, by the way, if you're a business professional and you want to learn how to use the Deferred Sales Trust, just in case the 1031 goes